Ingebrigtsen is, quote, loaded with training. Who sets national records 8 years after retirement? And how fast should you be able to run 1 mile?
The latest from the world of running, brought to you by AtoZrunning. I'm Andy.
And I'm Zach. And European Championships, track and field indoors, were this past weekend, and they were interesting. They were exciting. And they were a little bit more of some of the flavors you would expect as well.
Like the KINGebrigtsen flavor?
KINGebrigtsen. So it's no longer KINGebrigtsen. You don't need to say all of those words anymore. You just simply say KINGebrigtsen. I think it's so funny. I don't remember.
Some of you just vomited in your mouth a little bit.
Nobody did that. Do you remember where that actually came from originally? I feel like it was...
I learned it from you. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like it was like a message board post, but...
It had to do with the world indoor record.
Yeah. So it's been circulating some now. But Jakob Ingebrigtsen of Norway, need I say that? Yes, because some don't always know exactly who people are and where they're from. He ran the European Championships indoors yet again and completed the distance double successfully. That's the 1,500 and 3,000 indoors, which technically is not distance. It's really mid-distance. But he did that, and he did it successfully, winning both of them for his third time. That would be a triple-double or a double-triple? No, a triple-double. And they didn't let him have it easily. George Mills... Props to George Mills for the bold move in the 3,000, trying to really make it a race. And he's the guy to do it. He had the second fastest time in the group coming into the race, and so it makes sense. But in the same token, I don't know that you really have much of a chance in that moment unless Ingebrigtsen has a bad day, because he set a world indoor mile record this year. He has broken other world records in the last 12 months, and so
reigning Olympic champion in the 5,000 from over distance, so he's good at that range.
But the quote of the day comes from his brother Philip, who also competes for Norway but also is one of Jakob's coaches, and Philip said, it's strange, talking about Jakob, it's strange, he's actually quite loaded with training. If he feels this good now, I'm dreading what he'll come up with this summer.
Dreading.
What? Those two lines. The vernacular, because when people, who speak different languages say things, they don't always articulate them in the same vernacular.
I like it. I like how he did it. Oh, everyone should be dreading what Jakob Ingebrigtsen's going to be doing this summer if he's not tapered for this or sharpened for this.
I think these phrases are awesome. He's loaded with training.
Loaded with training.
That just gives you this visual of someone who's just ready to explode, which is so wonderful. And then he's dreading. He's dreading what he'll come up with. Are you, though? Aren't you a little bit excited?
On a non-Jakob Ingebrigtsen note, Sarah Healy won Ireland's first ever Euro gold medal.
Yes, right on. And so Ireland, not having won a gold medal in the indoor European Championships before, Sarah Healy gets a first for the nation. That's very impressive.
Very cool.
So certainly other exciting things, largely going to prelude the World Indoor Championships, which is coming soon. And so we'll be able to share those results with you, and it will be very exciting as well. Now, other kinds of track and road running recent news that's very interesting for you. First is Sam Ruth. I think that's how you say his name. Sam Ruth, a Kiwi runner, which is New Zealand, is 15 years old, turning 16 sometime this year, and he is very, very fast.
He's very fast.
He is that. So we were talking about the KINGebrigtsen a moment ago, and he's very fast, and he was very fast when he was a teenager. As a matter of fact, he's the youngest runner to ever run sub-4 in the mile. That's Jakob Ingebrigtsen. And Sam Ruth almost did it twice, but also has run a 1,500 meter is equivalent of under 1 mile as well.
Under 4 minute mile.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Under 4 minute mile. And Sam Ruth is just really wowing the crowds. He now holds the world best. It's not a record officially, because the World Athletics Organization only begins to recognize records starting at the U20 division. And so Sam Ruth holds the world best for a 15-year-old in the 1,500 meters, beating Whose record?
Jakob Ingebrigtsen.
KINGebrigtsen's record. And so he does not hold the fastest or the youngest to run sub 4 because it was a 1500. Even though a 341 1500 equals roughly a 358 mile, it was not a full mile. So he doesn't have that. But he's on his way. He has run 401 in the mile. He has run 756 in the 3,000 meters. And he's 15 years of age. But here's what he did this past weekend. At the New Zealand National Championships, track and field.
Which we were able to watch, by the way.
We were, yes. He dead heat tied two-time Olympian, 331 1,500 meter runner, Sam Tanner. And that's no small thing.
That's not a small thing.
Sam Tanner is very competitive, highly successful at a global stage, and the 15-year-old, who, by the way, it turns out they trained together with that
I
training
thought that
group
was
in
interesting.
It was very interesting. Sam Tanner does not spend necessarily all of his time training with Sam Ruth, the 15-year-old, but when they are in that location, they do train together, and that's pretty cool.
Well, young people are inspiring. I feel that
Or threatening.
older people
Or threatening.
are, well, it's my transition. Yeah. I think older people are even more inspiring. Because the young people, yeah, that's cool and it's surprising and it's awesome to follow runners that come up young. I think it's even more inspiring when people are able to do their personal best later in life.
Speaking of, that's your transition. Well done. Nicely transitioned. If you were to retire and then 8 years later, after having 4 kids, decide to start running again, what do you think would happen? Well, this Swedish runner, Ethiopian-born Abeba Aragawi, running for Sweden, was the 2013 world champion in the 1,500 meters. Very successful career. And in around 2016, retired from the sport. Now, there was actually a whole bunch of kind of weirdness around that because she actually was found guilty of doping.
Oh,
but
I didn't know that
it
part.
was because that they don't know this for sure, but it seems likely. In 2016, they added a new substance to the banned substance list, and at almost the same time they added it, like right at the beginning of the year, she tested positive for the substance. So it's like, okay, that's a banned substance. However, chances are she had taken it before it was illegal.
Okay.
And so no one really was like, she's up to shenanigans. And she retired anyway at the time because then she wanted to start a family, which she proceeded to do with vigor.
Yeah.
Having 4 children, moved back to Ethiopia, had 4 children, and now has decided to run again. And last year in June ran her first race in 8 years and ran a 10K on the roads. What time did she run? How fast?
31:05.
31:05, which was good for a Swedish record in the 10K on the roads.
Just incredible.
And then this past weekend in Lisbon at the half marathon there, she did it again, running a new Swedish half marathon record, 66:36, or an hour, 6 minutes and 36 seconds. And very impressive competitive performances here, which is really cool. 8 years, or in this case, 9 years after retirement and 4 kids later. That just is not common.
It's not common, no.
But there is a kind of bummer.
Yeah, is a bummer for her is that neither record counts as a national record because there's something about official Swedish clubs.
Yeah, they have to, in order to qualify to earn the record, this is the national governing body that decides this in this case. Sweden has basically determined that you have to actually participate in the sport with one of their clubs. And there's multiple. It's not just like you have to run for this one coach or something. But she doesn't do that. And so while she is a Swedish citizen, she does not get the Swedish records in this case.
I'm guessing, this is just a guess, that she probably will join one of those official clubs and continue to run faster.
Could happen.
I'm thinking that's going to happen.
So how about this next one? This one's really interesting. Talking about Olympians making money, or not in most cases. And along comes Ross Stevens. Ross Stevens had a lot of money, and probably still does have a lot of money. Ross Stevens decided, we're going to take care of some of these Olympians, and donated $100 million to the United States Olympic Committee to be delivered in $200,000 increments to all U.S. Olympians. from the next Winter Games through 2032, which is basically 2 Summer Olympics and 2 Winter Olympics. And so all those who participate for Team USA will receive $200,000.
That's so cool.
However,
Oh, there's a catch?
there are strange catches.
Okay. Tell me more.
First, the first 100,000 will be distributed either when that athlete turns 45 years old or 20 years after those games, whichever comes later. So 20 years later is the point.
Okay, well, maybe he's thinking like when you're an athlete, usually you're in your prime and you make the money all then.
Or you're dirt poor because you're an athlete who's competing in the Olympics, which is not a premier sport mostly. Now, here's a couple caveats with that. First, you only get the money if you make under $1 million, I think, a year. And so the pros, they're not going to get the money. The pro basketball players and stuff, while you are technically an Olympian, you're not going to get $200,000.
Because they're already making more.
And they're really sweating about that, I can tell you what. $200,000? I think I spent that on cheeseburgers last week. So, no, they do have a couple of rules to it.
But there's a lot of winter sports and summer sports where the athletes are paying their way to the Olympics.
Yes, which is part of what makes this a relevant consideration is like, but then you don't get the money for 20 years or more, which is weird. But then that's only the first 100,000. How about the second 100,000? This is even better. That goes to your progeny after you die. So
that means
you actually don't
kids.
get it. You actually don't get it. It's going to be donated to, yes, your heirs, however that phraseology works, upon your death. So I don't really understand the motivation behind that, except it's like a legacy thing, which is kind of cool in a sense, but also
and just really nice
weird.
of him to do. I mean, straight up, this is his money, and he's giving it up.
Yeah,
which is super cool.
Right. I mean, that's no one's telling him if you're going to give us money, you have to give it to us our way.
A certain way, yeah.
But what it comes down to, and this is why it's kind of just an odd move, is if you're going to say, okay, you can have $100,000 in 20 plus years or right now, you would always take the money now. Why is that, Zach? Because inflation.
Yeah.
Because the money 20 years from now is not worth $100,000 anymore. It's worth significantly less. As a matter of fact, more around the lines of like $40,000.
Well, he's probably investing it. It's going into something, this $100 million.
Right.
And
but the athletes don't get the interest.
Yeah.
You still get your flat $100K. So if you're the person, it's like, well, if you're trying to take care of the athletes, give it to them now so they actually get $100,000. And it's like, I don't know. So here's my point. This should not have been advertised as we're going to give you $100,000 later on. It should have been advertised as we've got $100 million investment donation, and you're going to get paid 20 years after the games, tens of thousands of dollars or something. Like, they shouldn't have committed to a flat rate number and then said when you're going to get it, because now you have those kinds of things.
Well, we're not at the table talking, so we don't know exactly all the things that are going on.
And there are no doubt more motivations than that in terms of why and what. Yeah. But it's cool, isn't it?
It's cool.
How cool is that?
Somebody cares about athletes.
Somebody cares about non-professional athletes. All right. Okay, so let's keep on. We've got a couple of headlines here that just are definitely worth some coverage beyond the race results stuff. First is carbohydrates. This was a very strange study that resulted from a very strange researcher's premise. The researcher's not strange. His premise is strange. The very strange premise of a researcher. And thanks and shout out to Alex Hutchinson over at Run by Outside for his amazing coverage. His coverage is always great. We talk very rarely about the authors of the articles. Alex Hutchinson is one. Pay attention to the stuff he writes because he has a very keen perspective. And this is an example of that perspective.
And Zach loves research, so
yeah,
that's
part of the reasons I like Hutchinson, because he always is sharing the research. Okay, well, here's what happened. This study looked at the difference between carbohydrates during performance and no carbohydrates. Nothing special there, except what was different is that the research team was only looking at 10 grams of carbs per hour. And so that raises a whole bunch of questions, like why 10 grams per hour? Like we already know that the body can process 60 to 90 grams per hour in normal circumstances, and possibly even more with some finagling about the specific types of ingredients and stuff. And so, why that? And this is where we get to the researcher's premise, which is very strange. This researcher proposes that the main thing you need in drain performance, and we're not talking about like serious long-term stuff like ultra marathon type of things. We're not talking about if you're going to do a marathon in 4+ hours. We're talking about like a couple of hours worth of exercise, 2 to 3 hours maybe. The main thing you need is not the grams of carbohydrates, but the stable blood sugar levels, which is a very interesting premise. No one's really tried to identify that discrepancy before. And that's what the researcher claims. He's like, you don't need 60 grams of carbs per hour. You just need enough carbs per hour to keep your blood sugar stable. And his whole point is, well, these studies that all say performance is better at 60 and 90 and all this stuff, they all make that claim without trying to identify whether blood sugar levels are relevant or not. They just presume that. So Alex Hutchinson dug deeper, as he is wont to do, and this is why we like his work, because it's like that's on face value that just seems kind of strange. So Hutchinson did two things at once here as he was looking at this study. First, he tried to look at the science around what this researcher was claiming, and then second, he tried to find some of those other major studies that have indicated the benefits of 60, 90, and 120 grams of carbs per hour. He found a couple of interesting things. First, the main study that tends to be cited or referenced the most is from about 2017, which shows basically the more carbs, the better. It does, by the way, stop increasing significantly after 90 grams per hour. All of the studies that he was citing had a kind of bell curve thing going on. And so there is an amount of carbs per hour that's no longer helpful. But still more helpful than nothing. It's kind of the point. So that main study from like 2017, who funded the study? Gatorade.
Oh.
Who wants you to have more carbs while you're running? Because they sell them to you. Gatorade. So he was like, okay, there's a conflict of interest. What other studies can we find then, and what do they show? And sure enough, there's plenty of other studies. So it's not hard to cross-reference these things. But the studies were not always consistent in saying more carbs equals better performance. As a matter of fact, what he was finding is that there's a kind of level that is optimal, and then it becomes erratic after that. Meaning some study candidates improved and others actually got worse when they were having more. And that line seems to be right about 60 grams of carbs per hour. So it is not maxing everything out. Now, this is his point in the article. His underlying point from Hutchinson is, but it depends on the person.
Yep.
And so you should try a number of different things. Don't just go with, this is what that study said, and I'm just going to only do that all the time. But try different things to find out what works best for you, because the studies all showed one thing, if not anything else. Different people had different responses.
Yeah, you want to bet that it's different between male and female. You want to bet it's different between size of person. I'm sure that all of these play a key consideration in how your body responds to the carbohydrates.
Absolutely. It's fascinating, isn't it? And you're going to hear more about those types of things in a different context when we talk about energy in some of our upcoming podcast content. So stay tuned to AtoZrunning, because we got a lot of good stuff. Okay, but before we wrap up, we do have our final headline to cover, because we teased it in the intro, and it's very interesting. I've said that word many times, haven't I?
It's very interesting.
It is good. And the headline from the New York Post was, how fast should you be able to run 1 mile?
We'll have to forgive that the word should is in there.
Not our fault.
Don't love that word.
It was basically an examination of, are there mile times that, based on your age, are reasonable for people to be able to do? And so they asked a few running coaches, and they developed a kind of list. Now, we have two caveats here. One of the running coaches gave us the first caveat, which he said, this is not like just if someone goes out and just runs a mile, who's never run before and they should be able to do this. He's talking about if someone is training regularly, and he specifically said 4 to 5 days of running a week, these are predictable times that they could do
for maximum mile effort.
Yeah, for like a mile race if they are training regularly. And then the second caveat is they used 10-year age brackets. There's a reason why most major age group division dynamics are divided by 5-year dynamics, and that's because 5 years makes quite a big difference after the age 35. And so it is you have to forgive that in some sense or another. A 30-year-old and a 39-year-old generally are not expected to be able to perform in terms of like their maximum potential in the same capacity. So let's do this. Let's talk briefly through what they said were the times, and then we did some research because we love to do this. We went to a mile race event that happens to be one that is local to us. Shout out to Run GR, Magic of the Mile. Okay, it's a great event. It's awesome. And what they do in that event is they run just mile races, heat after heat on a track, and they organize the results by age groups by 10-year increments.
So we can see it.
So we can actually compare. The cross-reference of this data is it's wonderful. And we have 3 years worth of results that we looked at just to give you a kind of good sampling. And then we're going to just find out how close to these times is the average person who runs this event, this particular event. It's kind of cool. So let's start with the times.
Yeah. Ages 20 to 30. And this is, again, from the New York Post.
Yes.
These are not the ones we delineated. Ages 20 to 30, men averaged 6:37, women 7:49.
So if you are in that age bracket, they suggest this is a time you probably could run if you're trained.
Ages 30 to 40, men average 6:47, women 7:49.
So notice that's the same time for the women, which is interesting, and because it's not for the men, although it's very similar. It's a 10-second difference. I don't know why that is. In particular, they didn't offer a defense of why those times are the same, except that we know statistically speaking, women tend to be able to run at their best longer than men, into older ages than men.
Ages 40 to 50, men average 7:14, women 8:17.
Okay. All right. So we're seeing kind of just a bump each year.
Ages 50 to 60, men average 7:50, women 9:11.
Right on. And they didn't go above 60, which is a bummer because some of the results that we have were above 60, and I would have loved to be able to compare those two, but they didn't. Okay. So here are your benchmarks then. You've got the male and female times. We'll share both of those as we go through it. And then you've got the age group. And the question is, do the data corroborate this prediction result? All right, so here's what we got for you. Based on the Magic of the Mile held in Grand Rapids, Michigan, they did this event. They do that quite a bit, but the results we looked at were from the years 2022, 23, and 24, and we'll talk about that here afterwards. And so how did we could say how did we do, since it's local for us?
Pretty darn well.
All right.
Ages 50 to 60 for the women. 100% of the women met the expected average from the New York Post. That's awesome.
For 3 years worth of results, 100% of them ran faster than their prediction.
Which is wild because some people can have a bad day.
Oh, yeah.
That's crazy to me that 100% ran faster.
They just didn't have a bad day in this age bracket.
Men, 97%.
That's close.
Which is really high, meaning if a couple had a bad day, that 90% is showing strong. Age 40 to 50 for the women, 75%.
That's an interesting, that's quite a bit lower. We'll come back to that.
Men, 87%.
Also quite a big dip.
Age 30 to 40, women, 82%. Men, 91%.
All right.
And then age 20 to 30 for the women, it was 89%. And men, 97%.
Again.
Wow.
How cool.
How good.
Okay. Couple observations. First, my inclination is to suggest that the women's times are a bit on the faster end of what we see in our area. The men's times are pretty much spot on, it sounds like, and based on those statistical anomalies. But that 40 to 50 age bracket for both men and women is the lowest. And so you wonder if maybe they overestimated performance a bit with that one. Because the gap between the 40 to 50 and the 50 to 60 age bracket is huge. But the gap between the 30 to 40 and the 40 to 50 is quite small. So it's like, I think that's a little too tight. I think that one needs to be relaxed a little bit based on our very limited sampling of data.
What I was thinking is that this is extremely impressive because when we go to run a mile race, we do not always get our full potential. And what the New York Post was saying is that this is our full potential time. So the fact that everyone did so well in percentages from this Magic of the Mile and GR leads me to believe that it's either an above average area or these times are super incredibly accurate, because I do think that I would expect to see a lower percentage. Also, not all the people who ran at Magic the Mile probably run to four to 5 days a week. There are probably some people that were jogging it or like running it easy because they just wanted to be part of the event. Yeah. So when I look at these results, think that we did a phenomenal job as a city.
So the next step in my mind is to find 10 big mile race events and then pull age group data and actually create a kind of statistical analysis here. Like these coaches did not provide data to support their observations. They were essentially just getting a sense of what do people tend to say and what kind of seems to be the average of those claims. I think we should pull more data and actually figure it out ourselves.
I think it's incredibly interesting.
It is. So there you have it. That's how fast you should be able to run a mile. And based on our perceptions, at least locally, you probably could. In terms of
I like the word could better than should.
Yes. If you're training regularly and you're healthy, naturally, and you are running a mile race that, is set up to be a good effort.
But if you're listening to this show and you're like, hey, Andy, this actually is making me feel kind of bad because I'm not close to that number. Remember, we don't care about numbers, really. It's just interesting information, and we don't want anyone to feel like they should do something, but potentially we would like people to feel like they could do something and that it opens up that realm of possibility. And that is our goal, to inspire, not to make people feel like, I'm not doing that. That stinks.
You always use the caveat, a well-trained runner. And so if you're brand new to the sport and you're just testing it out and you're thinking, I can't run those times, or if you're coming back from some kind of disruption, or if you're struggling with just being able to find good, consistent training in general, all those kinds of things, no one says, well, you better be able to run that fast in the mile or there's no point in doing it. That's not really the point of these things. But fundamentally, we don't care how fast anyone's running anything. It's just, it's fun to look at the statistics and see what is happening and get a sense of where and when that's going on.
That kind of is cool that Grand Rapids did so well.
Right?
I love it.
It's good stuff. So, as you detected here in this display of information, we are going to try to share with you every week the news happening latest in the world of running and bring that to you as a concise and focused episode, if you will.
And if you're interested in our other part of the podcast where we discuss topics that are relevant to you to help you thrive as a runner, make sure you check that out as well.
So tune in to AtoZrunning. We're on Instagram, we're on YouTube, and we're on Spotify. Find everything you need to know about us at AtoZrunning.com.